Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Thursday, September the 18th. Donald Trump told the state banquet that we're like two notes in the same chord, each beautiful on their own, but meant to be played together. I hadn't realised that the president was such a fan of our podcast. My name is Anne McElvoy from Politico.
And I'm Sam Coates of Sky News. Welcome, Mr. President, and welcome all to Politics at Sam and Anne's, where we squeeze everything that you need to know about the day ahead in British politics in around 20 minutes. There's been so much going on this week. It felt rather like squeezing into a corset after a mega state banquet. And conference season hasn't happened for the most part yet. I'm not looking forward to looking at those scales in a few weeks' time.
Well, coming up today, there is the Trump press conference this afternoon. We're maybe 48 hours away from Palestinian statehood recognition. There's some Tory infighting, surprise. The French one-in, one-out deal has ended up blocked by the courts, a big assisted dying victory for opponents in the Lords, and much else today. But Sam, you told me you wanted to start with a leak, something that a contact has sent for this podcast, because they know our sense of humour. What could possibly go wrong?
Yeah, I do like it when somebody sends in serious material for a cheap laugh. We are the home for that. And this comes under the heading, you couldn't really make it up. So this week, the government is undergoing something, a secret exercise called Exercise Pegasus. It's an exercise that stretches over a month. It's led by Wes Streeting's health department, and it's basically designed to test the government's readiness in a crisis. So basically, they're role-playing another pandemic. So today there'll be a fake ministerial meeting to find out what it feels like to have a crisis. Then there'll be a fake Cobra meeting to find out what they're like in a crisis. And today, everyone has been told, is the first day of live play for ministers and departments. So just pause there for a moment. And after everything that we've told you about the last few weeks, the metaphors really write themselves. You know, after 4 shock resignations, botched demotion, the one-in, one-out treaty with France going horribly wrong. And the government this week is deciding it needs to cosplay a crisis, live playing a fake crisis. I mean, maybe they could just look around.
Crisis, what crisis is, as somebody once said. Well, it also allows us to segue into the first thing, because pandemic preparedness, or the lack of it, is high on the agenda. It used to be the responsibility of Chris Wormold, who for many years was permanent secretary at the Department of Health. Before Keir Starmer appointed him cabinet secretary. This is an issue close to his heart. He's had a pretty torrid time, Chris Wormold, including over a number of appointments and relations with his own department or previous department at health. But this is something that he very much wanted to push through.
Yeah, it all links actually to what I was telling you about yesterday. So if you remember yesterday, we had that little scoop that Keir Starmer had been thinking about demoting his chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney. And those thoughts were aired in a series of meetings over the summer, sort of blue skies thinking about how to just get this government back on track. It's quite clearly not there. Another part of the blue skies thinking over the summer, I'm told, is that Chris Wormold, they were thinking about removing as the new cabinet secretary. Now, it's only months since he was appointed. I was told this again yesterday. It's not that won't be a terrible surprise to the Westminster Village. I think there was some newspaper report suggesting this over the summer. But that obviously and evidently hasn't happened yet. But, and here's the interesting bit, and here's the link to the leak, he might have to go anyway in November, because I think that's when the next stage of the report into the handling of the COVID pandemic crisis comes out. And Whitehall watchers that I've been speaking to expect there is a chance that he comes in for really quite a lot of criticism, because if you remember, the government was completely unprepared for a crisis. There was nothing in the filing cabinet, as I think Helen McNamara, another senior official, once said. So he could come under a lot of fire, and that then might be the trigger for him to depart from that job as cabinet secretary. So he is not out of the woods, even though he wasn't part of that number 10 rewiring. And a couple of other quick things after yesterday's McSweeney scoop. I'm told very explicitly that demoting him was the idea of Louise Casey. And of course, the idea was that he would report to Darren Jones, and then Keir Starmer backed off that. And also, and I just think optically this is really tricky, all of these ideas happened when Keir Starmer met a number of aides at Chequers over the summer. That Morgan and these meetings were meetings that Morgan McSweeney didn't attend all of, which is just really toxic optics. You've got a chief of staff and he's not part of your inner circle. That's what that tells me. So that's something pretty uncomfortable going on. And I do, a lot of people got in touch after yesterday's story. I do wonder still just how sustainable the politics of the personnel at the top of government is.
A party to which I was never invited, as the great Billy Bragg once sang. But still, let's note, and you are being a bit modest, unusually, Sam, when you said it was a little scoop. I think I haven't bumped into anyone who wasn't talking about this, what you're reporting there on that tension around Morgan McSweeney in Westminster in the last day. But let's note that Morgan is still there, and Louise Casey, who is a big figure, mooted for a major role in Number 10, isn't. So maybe the Prime Minister swithered on that in the end.
A very, very good point.
In the interest of balance, can we talk about Tory woes too? Now, Kemi Badenoch got a night off from Tory trauma. She was a very fetching Roland Mouret dress at the banquet with her husband, Hamish. But not all dining experiences go so well. The Telegraph has a great pot-stirring yarn today about a dinner in honour of the visit designed to demonstrate how the right is united. And that descended into an almighty row. It was on Tuesday at the Peninsula Hotel, senior figures from the Tories and Reform dining together as guests of Team Trump via the Newsmax media group. Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Mark Harper, Nigel Farage for the drinks bit, with Marco Rubio and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and Rubio, obviously, Secretary of State there for Foreign Affairs. So Mark Harper spoke on the need for welfare and immigration reform, and Andrew Neil, who was present, savaged him on about that record. There was tension in the room about that. And this ended up with, I think, a bit of a standoff between the various camps about who was to blame. So the question was, for me, was this really an outbreak of anger? Or you can call me a bit cynical here, Sam, but was it also Boris Johnson and Liz Truss competing for that US media airspace? Newsmax is a big outlet on the right of American politics. Both of them are on the speech circuit. They're going head to head in the autumn for the fall for attention in the US. What do you think?
Oh gosh, that is quite cynical. I'm not sure that all the figures in that room do rub along easily and gracefully. Sajid Javid was there, Liz Truss was there, Jacob Rees-Mogg was there. You just can't put those three in a room and expect everything to be completely smooth. Somebody who was telling me last night, Boris Johnson was sort of live texting details of the dinner as it was falling apart. The thing that caught my eye in the report in the Telegraph is about Jacob Rees-Mogg, the former business secretary. And he tried to be a bit of a peacemaker at the dinner, trying to smooth things over. And according to the Telegraph, was of the view that the Conservatives and Reform UK should work together. As a reminder, that's very much not Kemi Badenoch's position. And I mention that because there's actually a parlour game going on in Tory circles at the moment. This sort of slightly one with quite a lot of trepidation, which is who's going to defect next on the eve of Tory conference, because there is a sort of massive moment that Reform UK could steal Kemi Badenoch's thunder in a couple of weeks' time. It's a perfect moment to roll out your biggest name to date. So they're all going around wondering who it could be. One name put to me by a Tory parliamentarian was Jacob Rees-Mogg. But I have to say, based on my conversations with him and about him with others, I'm not at all sure. Yes, bring the two parties together, but I just don't think that he's the defecting type. I don't think it's in his DNA. There's also chat about Suella Braverman. She's an obvious person. Her husband defected to Reform UK earlier in the year. Again, I'm not so sure. It's less known that over the summer, her husband actually left Reform UK himself. So he only lasted a few months in the party. There's some kind of bust up between the Bravermans and senior Reform UK figures. So that doesn't look entirely smooth. But the parlour game, understandably, continues, it is Nigel Farage's style to try and grab the spotlight away from a rival at a big moment like that. And so I can understand why.
Jacob Rees-Mogg certainly has signalled that he wants a deal with the Tories, between Tories and Reform. He thinks that that's really the only way that they can get back to power, going in there together, rather than a full defection. Although how long that position will hold up, I don't know. He actually has one of his numerous family signed up to Reform fully over the summer, which he's quite benign about, but he himself is much more cautious because the terms of that deal just do look very hard to secure, don't they? How do you avoid going that far? He's a bit of a hero in many parts of that kind of reform penumbra. They like seeing him about. They find him cheerful and amusing and attractive. But yeah, how do you do that without tipping over into Team Farage? I think we're going to see an answer to this in the next couple of months.
Let's wait and see. Right, let's turn to the state visit, which is the moment of great ceremony today. Donald Trump will travel by Marine One helicopter mid-morning. He's currently at Windsor Castle with the King. Presumably they're having breakfast right now. And he'll head to Chequers for talks with Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer and Donald Trump have a bilateral for, I think, looking at the timetable, about 90 minutes. After that, Rachel Reeves is going to host a business reception, all those US tech bros in Chequers. And then there's the press conference, I think around about 2:20, maybe outside if the weather's nice enough. And then Trump will be gone just after 4. So it's with huge amounts of planning, but it doesn't actually last that long. Big deals, well, that's what they're going to want to talk about. There are possibly large sums of foreign direct investment in the UK, which is the sort of headline that the government wants us to talk about. 2/3 of that money is investment from Blackstone, the investment company, over 10 years. Investment comes, investment goes. You've got to be a bit careful saying that this will endure, but that's how we get to that big figure. There are an awful lot of things, though, when we get to the press conference, I think that the two men won't want to talk about. I've done a list. So deep breath. Jeffrey Epstein, Peter Mandelson, the lack of a tariffs deal, Nigel Farage, the UK getting closer to the EU, drugs pricing, because Donald Trump thinks that the UK should play more, and free speech. That's a selection of the things that Keir Starmer will sort of hope that don't dominate the press conference. Who knows what's going to happen because it's Donald Trump. But the one thing above all else that feels like the biggest difference of opinion in policy terms between the UK and the US is what's going on in the Middle East. Because as we revealed yesterday, in the next few days, the UK is going to recognise a Palestinian state. I said Tuesday yesterday. It could actually now be as early as Saturday to avoid the clash with Jewish New Year. So, Anne, that is an area of your expertise. Just tell us how you think that is unfolding.
Actually, I'm leaning on the expertise of Politico colleagues here, I should say, in fairness, both in Europe and in the US. So Donald Trump certainly won't be joining in with this European allied attempt to amp up pressure on Israel over the intensifying assaults on Gaza. An interesting line in Playbook this morning is picked up from one of our Washington colleagues who follows Islam in very close detail, relations with the administration and Israel. And they say there's not going to be a big deal made by Donald Trump over what Europe is saying and over what Keir Starmer is now saying about recognition. This is, according to a couple of people close to the president's thinking who were speaking to Politico there in Washington. And the point there is that Trump, this is a quote from these allies of his, doesn't care much about Europe's efforts to isolate Israel's government because they are largely symbolic. Well, that depends, doesn't it, how Donald Trump is feeling in the mood, in the moment, and on the day at the press conference. Sometimes the things that are said when he's in his office in Washington, in the Oval Office, are a bit different when he gets out on the road and people press his buttons. So I think that's what everyone is waiting to see today. Keir Starmer's in a difficult position, I think, here, because he has got certainly a lot of his backbenchers and some of his own ministers too have been quite clear that they want a bit of steel, as a line from a backbencher in the London Playbook this morning. They want to hear more of that kind of tone. So how does he align himself, Sam, when you've got a lot going on around the bloc in Europe. Germany, there's a massive row about Merz, German leader, distancing himself from the old position that Germany always supports Israel, obviously for reasons going back to the Holocaust. How do you keep aligned with your allies there? You've got the EU under von der Leyen going much further and talking about sanctions packages, which has sort of annoyed Germany and others, because is it really her job to do that? And then you've got us saying we're going to go ahead with this recognition. What are the terms of that? I think you've got some thoughts on that, and then I would just like to have a word about what it means for ambassadors and representatives and all of that world.
Yeah, three things that I'm watching for over the coming days. You can tell, you can smell the sensitivity in Whitehall about all of this. Not least because the day seems to be moving around. It was going to be next week, a week ago, but now it seems to be Saturday. So I think that's just a sign of the nervousness. Secondly, we're just watching exactly what is recognised. Government policy at the moment is that we believe that the Palestinian state should be, and I'm going to quote, based on 1967 borders, ending the occupation by agreement, right? So it's not that we recognize the 1967 borders, it's that we believe in the 1967 borders, but there is a further negotiation needed in order to determine exactly where the borders of the country that we are recognizing should be. So, as far as I can tell, obviously there is no negotiation going on. There is no agreement imminent. So you're going to end up in a situation where we recognize a country, but we don't know what its borders are, which is a difficult position. Nevertheless, this is a political move, so that is possible. And the UK recognizes countries, not governments, as we were saying yesterday, which is why we're not going to recognize Hamas. And then finally, and this is a conundrum that I tripped across yesterday, is what's it all going to be called? Because at the moment, if you again go to the government website, we call it, the government calls it, the UK government calls it the occupied Palestinian territories. But what will it be called post recognition? Will they still call it that? Because there are some that think that the UK should change the way officially it refers to it to Palestine. Here's the former ambassador, kind of on a particular wing of this argument, I think, but Peter Ricketts, a former ambassador to France, also worked on the Middle East desk in the Foreign Office. Here's his answer to that.
Well, to my mind, if the government recognises the state of Palestine, from next week onwards, the government should talk about Palestine.
And what do you make of all of that?
I think they are exactly the questions that are going to have to be answered pretty fast, because a lot of pressure is going to come on this position, or the switch in position of Keir Starmer to recognition. One is, as you say, on the name, what's in a name, but those who are, if you like, very strongly trying to make the point that this has to be a real thing would like it to be called Palestine. And I've just noticed in the usage in terms of campaigners, Sam, have moved to just calling it Palestine, rather, those of us who are trained through news desks over far too many years, probably it was always the Palestinian Authority, or that official, the occupied Palestinian territory, all those ways that people walked around it. Well, when you do recognition, you can't really continue to do that. So my guess is it does end up being called Palestine, but I think that will cause some arguments. The other is, what is the position then of an ambassador? Do you send a full ambassador? Yes, you can have an ambassador to a country, as you point out, but they have to sort of show up somewhere, and they can't show up and be seen to talk to Hamas. Well, they can talk to Hamas, but they can't be seen to get their credentials from Hamas. So one person we know whose role will change in this sort of misty mess is the representative to the UK, Hussam Zomlot, the Palestinian representative, and I am told he will likely become a full ambassador rather than simply head of mission. I think that will go down pretty badly also with the Israeli representatives here in London, but it's not absolutely clear what happens in reverse.
One well-connected person told me yesterday that they expect in the first instance that our person in Jerusalem, who already has some license to talk to representatives from the Palestinian Authority, that role will be beefed up, and there won't be a separate ambassador for the newly recognized Palestinian Authority, or Palestine, depending what the government decide to call it. But it's very complicated. The detail is not easy. And meanwhile, I think the US and Israel are talking about sort of how you carve up bits of Gaza. That's on the news this morning. Sort of, as you were just saying, making some of this debate a sort of quaint fancy, because it doesn't reflect what's actually happening between some of the players. Of course, everybody extremely strong views on all of this. The 20-minute alarm has gone off, and we can't do everything, every subject. Assisted dying, big win, by the way, for opponents. They've managed to get a committee in the Lords to scrutinise this. So there's a bit more jeopardy in that process, I think, injected. So much else besides. We'll be back on Monday for Politics at Sam and Anne. There's a lot going on. There's even a lot going on in our kitchen. It's breakfast time, and you can't stop that. But I'll be back on Monday with you, Anne, so have a great weekend.
Well, enjoy your shredded wheat. See you next week.